used to go and speak a lot at schools, and the kids were always enthralled. They loved to hear all that. And I don't know if they're still doing that. I really don't, because there's not that many survivors left. So many have died. To think that I'm on the young end of that is a little strange. My mother was a very tough, strong lady. She got us through a lot because he was unable after his experiences.
Tell me the story about your father again. You're back in Europe.
This was in the late 30s. The Germans had not crafted the final solution. He was in prison, and if you could prove that you had the proper documents to leave the country, they might was the key word, let you out. So my mother, being a very tough lady, went about beating down the doors, and she found a British naval officer. She told him their plight, and he helped. He helped a lot to get something that she could prove that we could leave the country, which she then presented, and within 2 weeks, he was released. But he was in terrible health. He had been beaten, he had been unconscious, he was never the same. We left within 2 weeks. Everything was packed. We were only allowed to take 1 suitcase a person. Everything else was ostensibly shipped, and we never ever saw it again. Nothing.
You have to be very careful with Holocaust survivors. You're treading on very delicate territory, as you can imagine. His whole social circle, everybody I grew up with, was a Holocaust survivor. As far as I know, nobody talked about it. It was horrendous. It's a nightmare. Why would you want to talk about it? And a lot of people did not want to inflict these things on their kids. It's when he passed away, and I was thinking about my grandchildren, I wanted them to have some record of what he was about. So I did the best I could. My parents were living in a city called Józefów, Poland. The Germans marched in 1939 when they conquered Poland. And my father said when they first arrived, it wasn't so terrible. And, it was a conquering army, and, they behaved like a conquering army. In fact, he told me the story of a man from Józefów, who he said, they knew the Germans were coming and everybody was terrified. And he said, oh, don't worry so much. He survived the Germans in World War I. Of course, what he didn't realize was the Germans of World War II were not the same Germans of World War I. So while he told my father, it's going to be okay, it was not. It was horrendous. My father said that, they took the men to work. I mean, the things that you expect of a conquering army at the time. Things got really bad in 1942. This was after there was the Wannsee Conference in Germany, but that's when the Nazis decided to kill all the Jews. Things got really bad. And at that point, my father and my grandfather, Moshe, and a lot of the men were already hiding in the woods. It didn't occur to them that the Nazis would go after the women and children. As surprising as it is, my father and my grandfather came home for the Sabbath, for Shabbos, Friday night.
Came out of the woods.
They came out of the woods. They came home for Shabbos. And then when Shabbos was over, grandfather said to my father, it's time to go back to the woods and hide. And my father said, no, I want to stay a little longer, with his mother and his sisters. So my grandfather left, my father stayed, and the Nazis came. And they rounded up all the women and children of Józefów, Poland. The estimates I've seen are anywhere from about 1,500 to 1,800 to 2,500 of women and children that were massacred. They took them out into the woods and they massacred them. And the Poles actually put a monument on the ground where these people are buried. They put them in a mass grave. My grandmother and my 3 aunts and all the other women and children that were gathered up with them are buried in a mass grave right outside of the town of Józef, Poland. And they took the men and boys to a camp. The object was to kill as many as they could. So the Nazis were on horseback, and this was July, it was hot, and they made these men and boys run in front of them. So if you stumbled and fell, they shot you. And it was miles to the train station. And when they got there, they served them cold water, and a lot of them went into convulsions and died. I mean, the object was to kill. That was it, not to be humane. But they took them to, actually, the camp was a POW camp. It was a Polish POW camp that the Germans set up in the city of Lublin, which is a large city. It was near Józef, which was a shtetl. My father said it was brutal. A lot of the scars that he had on his body were delivered at the camp. He was in a camp called Lipove 7, which was a POW camp. And after 3 months, they were sending a transport of 5,000 men and boys from the POW camp to Majdanek to be gassed. 4,000 went to their deaths immediately. And my father was left over overnight, because how many can you process in one day? And he was supposed to go to the gas chambers the next morning. But that night he escaped. There was a door in the wall surrounding the Majdanek, and he saw an opening and he took it and he ran and he got out. I don't know how many days it was, but he managed to run out through the woods and was chased by 3 Nazis on horseback, and they shot at him. They thought they got him because he dropped, and he thought he was dead when he woke up, but he was alive. And he continued, and it took a few days. He found a house at the end of the woods, and they gave him some food and some clothing. And then he hooked up with Jewish partisan groups from one group to another until he was able to make his way back to the environs of Józef. He was looking for his father, which he did find. Very few of my family survived. Most of them are in graves, those that got buried. I thought maybe over the years we'd learned something, and I found that for a lot of people today don't know history, and that's the educated ones, right? When people would ask me where I was from, because I have sort of a different accent than the Baltimorean accent or whatever, I would never say, and they would say, but where were you born? And I didn't want to say I was born in Bergen-Belsen, because the shock on their faces when I said Bergen-Belsen was awful, and I didn't want to put people through that, okay? Now there's no problem, because nobody knows what Bergen-Belsen was. And when I had to explain to people what Bergen-Belsen was, I would say it's the largest concentration camp in Germany, and Anne Frank died there. And then I would say, and do you know who Anne Frank was?
You know, people think it can't happen here. That's how it is, that people can't believe it can happen. And also heard Hitler saying that he will make not only Germany Judenreich, but you know what Judenreich is, Jew-free. She didn't walk any longer. She went back to the hotel waiting for my father, because it hit her very hard, hearing this. On the way home from Germany, from the meeting with my father, she was wondering, well, what will we do? Will he come to Hungary also? It was frightening. The same day, my uncle was taken away, hard labor. Somehow with some connection. That's very important. He was able to get home. Things started to get worse, and so my parents were thinking, there were a lot of bombing already. We had to go to the bunker. So what do we do? So my parents were able to get a birth certificate for me from one of the workers who had an same age child. I became a Christian girl. They had to teach me how to behave in a church. Now you have to remember that this is difficult, because I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and now I had to become all of a sudden a Christian girl. How do you tell your child that from now on you have to lie? Because this is your new name and don't forget it.
What was your name?
Margit Ratoni. Now my father and my brother, that's a different story. They couldn't get false birth certificates. They went to the woods into a hut. The hut was bombed. They jumped out the window without any of their belongings. The forest ranger happened to be there, realized who they are, and he said, "You can come to me, I take care of you." And when they got to his place, they saw that he had other Jews there too. The neighbor was not so nice. He noticed that there are too much going on in the neighbor's house and squealed on them. They were all arrested and taken to a detention house.
My mom grew up in the Bohemian part of Czechoslovakia in 1928. It was an arranged marriage with her mother and father, and within a year, her father went back to Hungary and never saw my mother and didn't support my mother. And that created insecurities for my mother. Her mother sent her away to England. She begged her mother not to send her away because partly her father had abandoned her, and now she felt her mother was abandoning her. From a rational point of view, my mother understood what was going on. From an irrational point of view, she never forgave her mother for sending her away. But had her mother not sent her away, my mother would have perished. There's no question about that. There were 15,000 Jewish Czech kids from Bohemia. Only about 150 children survived. And I don't know if you know the history of the country. It was a democratic country. This part is the Sudetenland, which was German speaking. So Czechoslovakia was formed in 1918 after the end of World War. When the country was set up, there were a lot of minorities. 20% was German, Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, Ukrainian. In the fall of November 1938, the Munich Agreement gave the Sudetenland to Germany. Hitler promised he didn't want anything else. March 15th, 1939, Hitler occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. And once that occurred, if you were Jewish, you were in trouble in Czechoslovakia. Initially, the Jews were able to live in their houses, but there were restrictions. Their kids couldn't go to school. They had to stay at home. You could only go shopping after 4 o'clock. You couldn't have a profession. I'm not sure how people made ends meet. Hitler and the SS were focused on exterminating the Polish Jews. And once that was done, then they turned their attention to the Czech Jews. This was the first country that Hitler occupied. It was before the war. The war broke out on September 1st, 1939, but this was March 15th, 1939, when he took over the country. What happened is a concentration camp was set up northwest of Prague called Terezin. Was able to live in her house until 1942. And in November, she was rounded up and sent to Terezin. And she was in Terezin for 2 months, on January 22nd. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the transports arrived in Auschwitz at night. They wanted to sort of stun the people when they came, so they did it at night. They came out of the train, and there was a German doctor, Mengele. First, they separate the men from the women and children, and then he would determine right or left. Right is death, left you lived, and most people went right. We know this because there was a relative who had been sent to Auschwitz earlier who wasn't killed. She was a very good-looking woman, and though it was against the law for Germans to have sexual relations with Jews, you know what happens under circumstances. So this woman was saved because of her looks. But she saw her cousin. She got sent right away to the gas chamber and died. My mother was born and lived in a small village southeast of Prague. It was called Hutcherborg. It was austere background. What Nicholas Winton wanted to do was set up the Czech Kindertransport. Nicholas Winton came to Prague in 1939, very early. Just after the Sudeten crisis, he started to try to help Czech children escape from Czechoslovakia. The British government agreed to it, but they put in two requirements. One, you had to get a family in England to take you in. You had to find a sponsor. And two, you needed £50, which was an astronomical amount of money, the equivalent of a few $1,000s today. Word of mouth spread that he was organizing this and he was trying to find sponsors in England and find the money. My grandmother heard from her sister who was working in Prague that there was this guy, Nicholas Winton, and he was trying to get Czech kids out. The sister told her that she should think about Olga. And as a single mom, she was very courageous. She was willing to give up the only thing she had in her life. And she went to Prague with my mother and they got on the list. This family in Croston, they were very religious Methodists. And they decided that they were going to, based on their religion, take in a child. The way it worked is Nicholas Winton would send them two pictures. He would give them a choice of two girls. What my grandmother did is to make my mother appealing, she dressed up my mother Czech costume. And that's the picture that was sent to the Cardwells in England. And they had two pictures, my mom and this other girl, and my mom asked them how did they pick her and not the other girl, and they said it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo. My mom, when she arrived in England, cried every night to sleep. She said she was devastated. But over time, you know, she wrote 100 and crossed it off and put 99 for each day. She thought she was going to go back after 100 days. She didn't. I wanted to show you a few things. Most people have never seen this, okay? In the concentration camp, the Jews set up currency. This is the currency in Terezin. They showed Moses, and this was 2 kronen. That was the Czech currency, krones. And so this was the new Czech currency for the Jews in Terezin. Papers that she had to carry with her that the English gave her. Alien's order. So she was an alien, certificate of registration.
Germany invaded Poland in September 1st, 1939, and I was born the following March. Poland was already under German occupation. My father was a goldsmith, and my grandfather had a watch, and he was also a watchmaker. And he and my grandfather had a store in the middle of town. And of course, when the Germans came, they took over the store. No Jew was allowed to have a business. And in 1942, they established a ghetto in Tarnów, and my parents and I had to move to the ghetto. The facilities in the ghetto were terrible. Actually, we were lucky because we shared a room with only one family. Some people had to live with 12 or more people in a room. So 3 of my grandparents, in June 10th of 1942, the Germans had what they called the first deportation. And that's when they took mostly the elderly. My 3 living grandparents were probably taken to Belzec death camp. Although my father said that somebody saw that my grandfather was shot climbing to the truck because he wasn't fast enough. He had arthritis. Some of them were taken to a forest nearby and shot and buried in a mass grave that were shot in that forest. We survived on so-called Aryan papers. We had false IDs, and that was non-Jewish papers, Polish papers. In 1942, like I said, we were taken to the ghetto. There was called the second deportation. The way the deportation was held is that they ordered all Jews to assemble at a place, like a square marketplace. Then they checked papers, and both my mother and my father managed to get jobs, which was not easy to do. They decided that they were going to take the children away. Many parents had to make that horrible decision, choiceless choice I call it, to either let their child go and save themselves. Well, my parents decided to go with me, and we were both taken on a truck to a place outside of town. Now, it was evening and there were no trains going anymore, so they were all herded into an empty stable to wait for the next morning for the train to Auschwitz. Someone intervened for my father. He had discovered or found a couple of hiding places, and so there were a lot of Jews hiding in those hiding places. And some of the people in this hiding place had relatives who were able to, they knew that once my family was gone, they would find a hiding place. Somebody managed to get to the commander of the ghetto and convince him that my father was a very important member of the so-called Jewish Council, which was not true, but he told him that he was very important and he needed to be taken out back to the ghetto. And that's exactly what happened. The next morning, my father and my mother and myself were taken out of the stable and brought back to the ghetto. And my father managed to get false birth certificates for me. My name remained Felicia because that's a Polish name anyway.